To start adding the character animations, we'll go to the character folder, and here we'll right click and go to animation and select blend space. And we'll choose the character skeleton. And we'll call it character underscore blend space underscore idle run. And then we'll double click on it to open it. Once again, we'll move the window and dock it with all the other windows. And here, we'll go to the left and open up the horizontal axis. And first call this speed. Then we'll set the maximum access to 600, which is the character speed, which we'll talk about how to set up and change in the character blueprint later on. And finally, set the grid division to 1. Now we have below here a grid, where we will insert the idle and run animation. So on the right here, we have the asset browser, and here it will show all the animations for this character. So we can drag this here to see it much more clearly. And then we'll select the idle one, and then drag it here to the far left of the graph. And now you can see the character starts to play the idle animation. Next, we'll add the run animation. Hold that and drag that here to the far right area. And now when you hold the control button and move your cursor to the right, it starts to show the blending from idle to running. And that's basically what the blend space is, where it will blend from the idle animation to the running animation. This is basically used when the character is not moving and its speed is 0. This is why we call the horizontal axis speed. And when its speed goes up to 600, the character starts moving and running. And it can smoothly blend between those two. We can save this blend and then go back. And next we'll create an animation blueprint. We right click, go to animation, and then choose animation blueprint. We'll again choose the character skeleton and then press create. And we'll call this character underscore animation blueprint. And double click on the animation blueprint. Now the first thing we'll see is the anim graph. This is basically a 2D graph where we have different nodes. This is basically a node, and we can move around here by right clicking, holding, and then we can drag around to see things. The first thing we'll do is right click and type in state machine and then press enter. This will create this new node called state machine, and it will ask us to name it. We can just leave it by default as is. And now we have a new node here. We can also hold on it and drag it around. The next thing we'll do is connect these two together. Basically, this is the output of the animation, and so anything that flows through here will make the character animate. And by the way, this is a preview of the character animation. So we can hold on this and drag out of it this line, which we can connect to other nodes. In this case, we'll connect it to the output pose, like this. Now they're connected and we can press save and compile. But currently there is no animation going on, so we'll open the state machine, and here you'll see this entry point. We'll need to connect this to any animation. You can put in anything here. So for example, if I just put in here the jump animation, drag it into here, and then just connect it to that, and press compile, the character will jump. But that's not good enough because we don't want it to just jump. So let's delete this. And what we want is to put in the blend space that we created earlier. We'll drag this into here and then rename it to idle run. Press enter. And now we can connect this to here. And then save. By default, it will be playing the idle animation. So now when we press play, you'll see that there's nothing going on yet. The reason is because we haven't connected it yet to the player blueprint. So we'll go back and then go back to the player blueprint. And in here, we talked about this earlier where there was this weird animation going on. That was because we were using a different animation blueprint. Now it's set to none. We'll open this and choose the animation blueprint we made earlier. Character, animation blueprint. Select that. And you see now here, the character is animating properly. We can save and compile and press play. And now the character is properly animating. But if we move around, nothing's happening. So we need to program the animation to make the character run when there is movement going on. So we go back to the character blueprint And in here, we'll double click on the idle. As you can see, this shows us a new menu. And basically we've gone into the idle run state. And here we have the variable that we set earlier that was speed. And as we discussed before, if this goes up to 600, the character will be showing the run movement. So we'll drag out of this line, and we can select promote to variable. This will basically create a variable, which is the speed variable, and it will be saved down here under the variables section. We can press enter, and automatically it was named speed based on the name we chose in the blend space. It says here a float, and a float is basically just a number, which we can see here by scrolling down. We have to first press compile, and then now we can see here the speed. So if we, for example, set this to 600, we'll see the character starts running around. But we need this to happen dynamically, based on the character movement. So we set it back to 0, and press save. And we'll go back to the event graph. Over here is basically where we program things for the animation blueprint. So by default, there's the event blueprint update animation. And below it is the try get pawn owner. This is basically a function that runs every frame. And this gets us the player blueprint. So what we'll do is from this, we'll drag and then get velocity. This is basically the movement of the character, and it returns as a vector 3. I'll later explain what that means, but what we want for now is to turn this into a float, so we can use it for the speed variable. So we'll drag again, and write vector length. And now we have this here. And last thing we'll do is we'll drag from this and write set speed. And because we have already a variable, it will show us this. And that will actually get this variable here. But right now nothing will happen because it's not yet connected to the function. So we'll drag this. And now we save. And now for every frame, it will get the speed of the character and put it into the speed variable. And that will then, in the idle run, pass that to the blend space. And so now if we save and compile and press play, when the character moves, we see the run animation also happening. And that looks much better now. But if you noticed, nothing is happening when we jump. So we'll need to add a jump animation as well. Exit, and let's go back to the state machine. In here, we'll drag the jump idle and put it here and call it jump idle. And then from the idle run, we'll connect that to the jump idle. And if we just leave it this way, when it transitions to the jump idle, it will just stay there. So we'll have to transition back. So we'll again drag from jump idle to idle run. And then we click save. Right now nothing is going to happen, and this is why you're also getting an error code, because these two here are the transitions, and they need to have their own code that tells them how they should transition. And if we double click on them, for example, we get this, where it's asking for us to connect something here. So back in the event graph, we'll get something again from the player blueprint. We can actually copy this by Control-C, and then we'll move here, and then we can actually press Control-V to paste it. From this, we'll get the get movement component, and I'll be explaining what that exactly is in later on. And then here we'll get the is falling boolean, and this is basically what we need to know if the character is in the air or falling, and that's when we want to switch to the jumping animation. And then this is basically a boolean, which is just a true or false variable, which is the most basic variable there is, that basically tells us if something is true or false. So we'll drag that, and because we don't have this variable saved yet, we'll just promote it to variable and call it is falling question mark. And basically, as you can see, the way functions work in blueprints is it's a consistent line going, one after the other. So if, for example, we just connected to this function straight to the is falling, it will skip the speed one. So it has to be all connected together. So we'll go back, connect this to speed, and then connect speed to is falling. And then we'll organize it a little bit. And then press save and compile. Now every frame, we're getting this boolean from the character to check if the character is in the air or falling. And then back in the state machine, we'll jump into the first transition that's going from the idle run to the jump idle by double-clicking on it. And here, we'll get is falling variable. Another way to get variables into the graphs is by holding on them and then dragging them into the graph and then letting go. Here it will give us two options to have a get or set. A get is where we can just get the variable, and a set is where we can set it, like we did earlier in the event graph. In our case, we want to get it, so we'll do this, and then we can take this and plug it into here. And then press save and compile. And then press play. And now here when you jump, you see it jumping, but look at that. The character is stuck now. There's two issues we have here. Let's first fix the first one. As you can see, not only is he stuck in the jumping animation, the animation also has stopped. So we have to make sure for this animation specifically to loop, because it's an idle animation. So we go back, and back to the state machine. We select the jump idle, and over here, we select it, and we scroll down on the details tab, and then inside of the settings section, we'll toggle on the loop animation to true. And then when you do a true or false, it shows a tick mark. We save that, and now we go back, and now when we jump, the animation will keep going. Now let's fix the landing issue. Let's go back to the state machine, and here, let's actually remove the going back transition, compile that, and then we'll need to add a new animation, which is the jump land animation. Let's call it jump land. Put that below, and then connect the jump idle to the jump land. In here, we'll open up this transition, and once again, we'll get the is falling and do get. But this time, we want to check if is falling is false and not true. So if we just connect this to here, it will only activate this when it's true. But we want to do it when it's false. So we'll drag this and then select not boolean. Press enter, and now we get this node. This basically reverses it, and it basically checks if it's not falling anymore. And then we'll connect that to here. And now when you press save and play, when we jump and then land, it does the landing animation. But once again, it's not transitioning back to idle run blend space. So we'll need to fix that next. Go back, and then go back to the state machine, and finally, let's take the jump land and then connect that to the idle run. Now this time, what we want to do is we want to transition from jump land to idle run when the jump land animation ends. The way we do that is we select this transition, and we can choose here automatic rule based on sequence player in state, and we tick that to on. Now this transition will happen once the jump animation ends, and then it will transition back to idle run. So now let's save, compile, and press play. And now when we jump and land, we transition back to the idle animation, and we can walk around and jump and do whatever. And now we have a very nice idle, run, jumping, landing, and then going back to idle animation system. And that's it for this lesson.